Pauline Tully is next. So, Pauline.
Good morning, Minister. Look, the consistent message we hear from witnesses who come before us is around the cost of disability. I suppose we've one of the highest levels of people with disabilities at risk of poverty and social exclusion. Many live in consistent poverty and deprivation. And I know you referenced the Indicon report that your own department has carried out, so I'm just wondering what measures are being taken to address the findings of the Indicon report, but more specifically, I suppose, what action has been taken to support disabled people struggling with the cost of living currently, because I know you talked about the increases that were given in Budget 2022, and that's welcome, but inflation has overtaken those increases long before even the current crisis has descended upon us. So I think disabled people need support immediately. Also, we know we've one of the highest levels of unemployment among our disabled people in Europe, and everything should be done to encourage employment. But many people are reluctant to take up work because of the fear of the loss of their core payment and secondary benefits. So I think we need to look at that, because I know you reference again that the disregard for disability allowance and blind pension was increased by €20 to €140. But €140 isn't sufficient excuse me, along with your pension to live on. And many people are also fearful of losing, say, especially the medical card. So I'm just wondering if we could look at that again. And I even talked to people who are self-employed and want to establish their own business, who are entrepreneurs and they don't feel the supports are there, or the back-to-work schemes are not tailored to the person. They're set at a number of years rather than around what the person needs and how long they take to get back into work. And it also around artists as well, and musicians whose work is often on a commission basis, and they're afraid to take up commission because they will lose their core payment of the blind pension or the disability payment. And I just think if that could be maybe structured differently, to look at it on a yearly basis instead of a weekly or a monthly basis. Excuse me. You also talked about the number of claims for disability allowance that were refused. I mean, there were over 28,000 claims made in 2021, and only 13,000 of them were awarded. I would be concerned about that. So, and you say like a lot of them aren't actually appealed. They're not appealed because people may not know how to appeal. We need to ensure that the mechanism for making the application in the first place is easy read and is structured, or the supports are put in place for disabled people to make the application, and that they're aware then that they can appeal this decision and how to do that. Because another big issue that we come across is the lack of knowledge on entitlements and how to apply for the different schemes or supports that are there. Now, Mary already mentioned about the means tested payment and the effect it has on disabled women. Disabled women were in with us. They said that the actual prevalence of domestic violence among disabled women is higher than among women generally, and it's oftentimes the reason they don't leave is the lack of independence, because they are means tested against their partner's income and therefore don't have a payment of their own. Could this be revised, that if a person is receiving a disability payment or a blind pension, that maybe the spouse's income could be looked at to be taxed at a higher rate, or something, that it could be done that way, that the disabled person would still be able to claim their own payment and rely on that. And even find that, when people get to pension age, many women again, feel they want their own money. And sometimes they're not allowed to have their own money because their partner is still working and is earning, and their pension is means tested against that. And I suppose the last point I want to just make as well is the carer's allowance, just the length of time it takes to process. It takes maybe up on 4 months, and it's an inordinate length of time, and if that could be looked at as well to make it easier. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you very much. Now, Minister.
Thank you. Thanks. Well, just to say, when carers is being assessed and the application comes in, the figures I have is that it takes an average of 5 weeks. And those figures have come down considerably over the last number of years. In 2021, applications were turned around, as I said, on an average of 5 weeks. And I'll go through the figures later on the appeals. But the fact is that a lot of of the applications fail in the first instance because they haven't got the medical evidence correct. And you know that yourself, Deputy, from dealing with your constituents the same as I do, is that the medical evidence might not always be complete when the form goes in, and then when further medical evidence is provided, the application is often successful. Just to say that we have also simplified the form to apply for disability, and if people are unsure about appeals, they can, citizens' information is there. They provide an excellent service to give people advice on what their entitlements are, and indeed it's available, as you know, there's a very good website for citizens' information, and I know we use it a lot in our constituency office, and I'm sure you do too, and that we often find that people come into our constituency offices to see why their application wasn't successful, but the majority of times that it's not successful is because the medical information hasn't been provided, and that's something that's obviously needed to make the assessment. Now, just to say, there's been, I think it's fair to say that we have done a lot of work to support people with disabilities in this country, of course, there's always more to be done, and that's what we'll continue to focus on. But the effort for people to help people with disabilities is required right across government departments, whether it's in the Department of Housing, the Department of Transport, Education, Health, and other departments. So I have outlined what I've done in my own department of social protection, and in fairness, we have done an awful lot in a very short space of time. I have reformed the carers allowance means test by significantly increasing the amount of savings and weekly earnings a carer can have. I'm the first minister in 14 years to do anything on the carers means test. I increased the rate of the wage subsidy scheme in the budget. That's a really important support to encourage employers to take on and hire people with disabilities. Again, I don't think the rate has been touched on that for over a decade. I've also made changes to the income disregards for disability allowance in the budget. And when there were doubts last year over whether the local ability providers would continue to be funded because the European funding had run out, I made sure we found the funding to keep that programme going. I met with Des Henry and the ability providers across the country, and indeed you all know the great work that they do. During the pandemic, we made sure that people on carers or disability payments who lost their part-time work got the PUP, so that meant they were able to get 2 social welfare payments to help them. When a clear injustice was brought to my attention for PhD students on disability allowance, as I mentioned earlier, I acted in a matter of days and introduced Catherine's Law, and as I said, we have now extended that to those in receipt of the blind pension. Also, as I said earlier, the number of people receiving payments like disability allowance, carers and invalidity have increased by about 40% since 2015. So this means my department is now helping and supporting more people through those payments than ever before, and I think that the total spending on our various disability supports this year will be close to 5 billion. So would I like to do more? Of course, I'd like to do more. Every minister would like to do more, but I have to work within the realities of government and, of course, finite resources, and we can't do everything we want to do at once. But I can assure you that supporting people with disabilities and supporting our carers will be a priority for me once again in this year's budget. I'm absolutely committed to working with Minister Anne Rabbitte and my colleagues across government to improve supports for people with disabilities, there is a lot of work being done out there. You mentioned about what we're doing regarding poverty amongst people with disabilities. At the 2020 at risk of poverty or social exclusion rate for people with disabilities 35.9%. That's a decrease from the 2019 rate of 37.5%. and this year's budget package for people with disabilities specifically included measures that will help to address poverty amongst people with disabilities, such as the increase of €5 to the maximum weekly rate of disability allowance, blind pension, carers benefit, illness benefit and invalidity pension, with proportionate increases for people getting a reduced rate, increase the qualified child payment rate for children under and over 12 years of age, an increase of €20 to €22 to the living alone allowance, benefiting people in receipt of disability allowance or an invalidity pension and who live alone, increase in the fuel allowance to €33 per week, benefiting people in receipt of disability allowance or invalidity pension who qualify for the payment, and for those people who are working or in a position to take up work, the measures include increasing the upper earnings disregard for the disability allowance and the blind pension by €25 again up to €375, increasing the general weekly means disregard for disability allowance from €250 to €760, and this will result in an increase of up to €5.10 per week where a person on disability has means, and extending access to support grants for job seekers with disabilities through employability contractors, and an increase in the rate of wage subsidy scheme available for private sectors by 1 hour to €6.30 per hour. So that's a significant increase, and that's 60% of the national minimum wage. So there's a lot of supports out there for people with disabilities to get work. We do incentivise employers to take them on, and then of course there's you mentioned that the basic pilot, the scheme for artists, and just as you know, the Arts and Cultural Task Force recommended the introduction of a pilot basic income scheme for artists, and this commitment was reflected in the National Economic Recovery Plan. Budget 2022 included an announcement of €25 million to pilot a new basic income guarantee scheme for artists, and my colleague, the Minister for Tourism, Culture, Arts, Gaelic Sport and Media has lead responsibility for this initiative, and the matter is being progressed by Minister Catherine Martin and her department, and any issues regarding the interaction between the new pilot payment and existing payments from my department, such as disability allowance, of course, will be addressed in due course. So I think it's fair to say, Deputy, that we have done a lot of work in terms of improving the situation for people both who are caring and for those who are on disability. But of course, there's always more to be done, and we certainly review all of those things. And I just have the figures here now on the claims. So significant improvements in new claim decision making have been achieved over recent years for carers allowance and carers benefit, and this has been maintained by my department throughout the period of the pandemic. The average time to award carers allowance in 2020 is 4 weeks, as compared to 7 weeks in 2020 and 14 weeks in 2019. The average time to award carers benefit in 2021 is 4 weeks, as compared to 5 weeks in 2020 and 12 weeks in 2019. I think it's fair to say that those figures have been improved. When you think about during 2020 and 2021, the huge volume of work that the staff and the Department of Social Protection processed in terms of millions and millions of transactions to make sure that people got the PUP payment. So to achieve that level and those improvements in terms of time is quite something, given the circumstances in which they were working. So I think I've covered most of the things there, Deputy. Thank you.
Pauline, thank you.
I mean, Minister, you talked about the roadmap for social inclusion, and it commits to reduce the at-risk of poverty and social exclusion rate for people with disabilities. But it's still going to be 22.7% in 2030, which is almost double what the average rate, risk of poverty rate is now in general, or was actually in 2020. So, okay, and great. I welcome everything that's been done to support, obviously we do, with people with disabilities. And as you say yourself, there's a lot more needs to be done. But we seriously need to look at the cost of disability on people and get people out of poverty and deprivation, because that's what many are just living basically hand to mouth and depending on charity to get by.
Thanks, Deputy. Well, the cost of disability report, as you know, was commissioned by my department, the Indicon report, and there's that report is currently being looked at by a committee that's been chaired by Minister Rabbitte. And it's not just all about, there's other areas that we have to look at in terms of the cost of disability. Again, it's whether it's housing, transport, health. There's a number of other areas that we have to look at as well. That's been looked at in that committee, and can I just say that there's a lot of work going on there, and I'm very happy, and we'll be working closely with Minister Rabbitte in that respect. And this is a very comprehensive report that was prepared by Indicon, and again, a basic standard income for all people with a disability is unlikely to properly address the costs incurred by those most severely limited by their disability. So I think what we need to do, as we all recognise, resources are finite, but we want to target those resources to the people who need them the most. So there are those who have disabilities who are severe and profound disabilities, and then we have the other side of the scale, we have those with a lot less disabilities. So I think we need to really target the support at those who are profoundly disabled and who need the most support. So the one-size-fits-all approach is not fit for purpose, and that's come out very clear in the report. Again, these are the issues that this committee will look at, and they'll come forward with the recommendations based on the report that they're currently doing the work on.
Thank you.
Okay.